Indian society has got two types of communities. One is hierarchical, another is non-hierarchical. That which is relatively non-hierarchical is referred to as the communities who are popularly known as tribes. The other one is hierarchical, which has been identified as caste. The caste and tribe, these two words, are not native words. None of the Indian languages has got these two words, tribe or caste. However, these two terms used as a tool to differentiate one type of community from another by the British. This is how the tribe has come into being. In Indian languages, we do not have a term referred to as tribes. Traditionally, we have been using the term like jati. The jati refers to a classificatory tool. It is being used to identify someone, some community as X jati or Y jati, such as Konda jati or Brahman jati or Karan jati or Santal jati. This jati is used as a suffix to the native term. There people define them as Santal or Kond or say Binjal. This implies that the jati term has got a classificatory identity. Say for example, this has been used in varieties of context, such as we say German jati, Bidesh jati, Nari jati, Purush jati. So this has been used differently in different contexts to identify someone as a specific group. Either it is defined as a native or non-native. For the non-natives, we use Bidesh jati. For natives, we say that they are Adim jati or Bono jati. Adim refers to ancient jati. Bono jati refers to the tribals who are living in forest area. Bono jati almost close to that of the Adim jati. There are Mool jati. Mool jati, the ancient people who are living in a particular territory. However, popularly we have been identifying the tribes as some group of people who have least hierarchical identity. Absolutely, they are having a differentiation, but then they are not hierarchical like that of the caste in India. This implies that we use the term which has been borrowed from the British administrators. The tribe has been identified by different people differently. Some say it is a non-hierarchical group living in a particular territory having distinct culture and language. Some say it is the community who are not developed, who are either living at the mercy of the nature. They are close to nature. They are referred to as Bonajati refers to that Bon is not equal to that of the forest, because forest term has been used as a commercial term. Bon is an integral term to the Indian culture. That is how we say Bonajati. We don't say forest jati or jungle jati. Yeah, we use the term jungle as a term of to identify someone not with honor. That is how we say Bonua jati, Bonua. Bonua is used as a derogatory term. So, as such, if you ask any native people who are living in relatively isolated area, possibly the meaning in their own etymology refers to, in their own language they say that we are man. For example, Binjals are referred to as Binjal. In the Binjali dialect, it refers to man. When someone asks the Binjal, what does it mean? When I inquired, I have seen that a Binjal said that like water, sky, bird, soil, plant, we are like man. This is a beautiful identification that is almost integral to their own perception. Now, when we say that the tribe is identified by someone else, which we normally call exonym, the name has been given by outsiders. Say, for example, Binjals are being identified by the non-Binjal gentry, the landowners, as Binjal. When I ask them, they say, Binjal ज़्यादा मेहनत करने से भी पसीना नहीं निकलता. This implies that a community who has been identified by outsiders for a particular purpose, they identify them as the labor component. That is how they say the landless laborers such as Binjals can be put to agricultural practices as a labor who can work very good. That is how they identify themselves as Binjal. ज़्यादा मेहनत करने से पसीना नहीं निकलता. When I ask the Brahmin in that locality, they say Binjal must be the term. They must have migrated from Bindhya Alay. Alay means residence. Bindhya is the forest range, where in the Bindhya range they were the inhabitants. They might have migrated from that area and in due course settled in different villages. Exactly in the same fashion, you will see that varieties of tribal communities have their own names. And mostly the term tribe has been used by the British administrator, which is still continuing. And when we say tribe, if I say we don't have tribes, we have only scheduled tribes, this will be more correct. It's because we should use the term tribe, it refers to the British identity, British classification, British indication of a particular community to be identified as tribe. Maybe that is their definite purpose. There is a definite purpose involved in this. They say that in order to control the tribal people in forest area, we need to have administrators, because British face the problem in exploiting the natural resources such as timber. And also the people when started fighting against the outsiders to keep their environment intact, they face a problem. So that is how they say, now they have a different social system, they have a different perception, they identify themselves differently, therefore it is necessary that they must be studied in different angle. So now we see that every subject is claiming that they are studying the tribes. Linguists say that they study the language of the tribes. Economists say that the transaction that is there with the tribal communities is being studied by the economists. Psychologists say that there is a group psychology, the group behavior and individual behavior, that is their study. Like that, different disciplines are studied differently, but then the way the anthropologists study is very, very typical. Anthropologists, to understand an anthropologist's work is to see that the anthropologists stay in the tribal communities for a longer period of time. They keep observing the tribes from all varieties of angle, and we normally say that it is a holistic approach. And after a long stay in the field, the natives' traditional practices and the changing practices across the period can also be identified by the anthropologist. Anthropologists are trying to understand that how the natives perceive themselves and perceive outsiders. Anthropologists are trying to declass themselves, and they try to understand from within the community. There are two ways of looking at things, ethic and amic. So when somebody is trying to see the community from within, we see that it gives a different picture. And the perception, the behavioral components, the norms and the practices, the traditions, the customs that they have is completely different from that of the non-tribal communities. So therefore, when we say tribe, we need to understand from the context the tribes perceive. Popularly, it has been stated that India is a society of communities and groups. not the society of individuals. This implies that we are belong to a scripted society, not achieved society. When the tribals are identified, tribals are said to be the society of communities, and the caste are referred to as society of groups. This implies that community features must be expressed to identify the tribals. They have their own habitat, they have their own language, they have their own identification of territory. They have a concept that we are integral to the entire nature. They say that the way we perceive is different from that of the non-tribals with regard to the property. They, in a context, if you say that tribes do not have a concept of private property and they have a concept of community property or commons that is being shared and cared by their own community members. They have their own traditional leaders, ritual leaders, traditional lineage heads. They sit together to take any decisions they wish to have in future. If there is a crisis, they need to overcome the crisis through a consensus. They call to the elders, sit together and decide as what action has to be taken by whom. In a sense, when you start speaking the tribal administration, the administration in fact is referring to in a modern context you say administration never speaks, it reads. That means there must be some documentation. And tribes have never bothered to document anything because the concept of property they have is completely different. They identify themselves as something inseparable from nature. This implies that tribes, the scheduled tribes as we have in India now, have unique features. Due course of time, there has been changed perception. Some of the tribal elites have transformed themselves. Some people are by birth tribes, but in the process of socialization, they have acquired non-tribal features. So that is why some of the tribals are also becoming exploiting persons, the exploiters, to their own communities. There are some who are very much docile, say they have a lot of withdrawal symptoms, and therefore they say that if I need to take any decision, I so much cannot take decision, I must consult to my leader. The tribal communities to be developed was thought by Britishers even. They say backward communities, they say primitive tribes. There are certain words used. Primitive is a derivative term. In fact, this primitive term has been continued in our administration till almost 2012 when we say PVTG. We say the PVTG, particularly vulnerable tribal groups, were known as PTGs, primitive tribal groups. So therefore, when we use the term the tribe, we need to understand that tribes are no different from we people. So therefore, we must treat them with honor, with all esteem, with all respect, like any other bona fide citizen of the nation. But then, when you try to see how this tribe and their administration come into being, we need to understand how the tribes have been identified by the British administrators. What was the census report says? What the census report has said earlier. Say for example, in 1861 for the first time, Jodhpur royal family had taken a step to have an enumeration, some census on tribal men and women. The purpose is not known as why they wanted to have it, but then they had some sort of a census. The real census is coming to being in 1891 by British. That's also incomplete. After independence, our first census came into being in 1951. During 1951, as per the constitution, as per the article number 342, where the names have been enlisted who are known as the scheduled tribes, we had 212 scheduled tribes. In 1971, it has increased to 427. In 11, it has reached to 705. There are many committees, and there are certain committees are set to see and verify whether the action taken by independent India has transformed the tribes, whether it has elevated the economic, social, educational and political standard of the people, whether the tribal people have realized that they have changed their earlier status, whether they have gone in the same line to get merged with the mainstream of life of the nation, whether they are competent enough. In fact, we have got a huge number of articles in the Constitution. For example, we have 12 schedules. The 5th and 6th schedule are specifically meant to see that the tribes need to be studied differently and they need to be administered differently. They must be treated as preferential discriminated category of people. So, when you say that tribes who are scheduled tribes as of now are preferentially discriminated communities, within them, the committees started identifying that there are people who are further marginalized. The tribal people themselves are marginalized groups, but marginalized communities. But then within them, there are also further marginalized. So therefore, there was a study made. All state governments were instructed to identify the geographically identifiable area where the people within the tribal communities are further marginalized. And that has been done. And as of today, we have got 75 PVTGs, particularly vulnerable tribal groups. In Orissa, we have got 62 scheduled tribes. And from within the 62 scheduled tribes, there are some subsets of the tribes who are identified geographically to be further marginalized, and we have got 13 PVTGs. These PVT, in certain literature, it has been mentioned that of the 62 scheduled tribes in Orissa, 13 are PVTGs, which is wrong, because these 13 are subset of the existing 62 scheduled tribes. So therefore, we should be very careful to quote somebody's statement when we say that there are 13 PVTGs in Orissa. For PVTGs, and the government of India has carved out certain preferences, certain funding provisions, like Article 275 Section 1 specifies that there is a specific amount of money that is being directed to be used only for the PVTGs. In India, we have seen there are many states where there are a huge number of tribal communities. The 5th schedule is being used for the central provinces, and northeast area is being administered under 6th schedule. So when you say 5th schedule people are to be treated differently, we need to see whether they are having distinct identity. Their territorial identity is different. In fact, on survey it has been seen that in Orissa we have got around 44% of the geographical area which is identified as scheduled area. And this is for the scheduled area, admissions are differently made. For scheduled area development and the people's development of that area, the central government also has some provisions, like the Central Special Assistance, which is coming to TSP, Tribal Subplan Area. As I said, that under Article 275, there is some amount comes directly, not to be used for any other purpose other than the PVTG's development. So we have varieties of interventions are made by both government, central government and state government in their administration. Of course, any development is identified through two big pillars, the education and health. If the education and health has to be given importance, we need to take people into their confidence. And people, once the people are taken into confidence and they are becoming the shareholder of the decision making process, possibly the idea of educational development and the development in health sector will be most positive. Normally what happens, as we have seen, either the bureaucrats decide as what development has to be made for the tribals, or the planners who did not have the idea of the grassroots realities, they say that this is the way the development has to be done. We had a trickle-down theory earlier, that the decisions are taken at the center, and it was believed that once it is decided at the center, that will trickle down to the grassroots level, which has witnessed the utter failure. Then we thought that why not to think of Panchayati Raj Gram Sabha, that in 1996 the amendment has come to treat these people under PESA, the Panchayati Raj extension to scheduled area. And this is how tribals have to be treated differently, where the tribal people have a say in the decision making process. They need to have their own planning process. They have their own priorities, and the bureaucrats, the planners, the administrators must understand what priorities and how the priorities are to be recorded, and which is more important for the communities. Say X community may have got one as the important area. The same important area may not be true in case of the Y communities. Therefore, tribal development has to be done community specific and area specific. This is how development has to be seen from within, not from outside. But then even today, we have seen that we have not marched ahead. We have not gone to substantial change situation for the tribals. The tribals are still lagging behind. Except few tribal communities, the majority of the tribal communities are still backward due to a number of reasons. Maybe the reasons can be classified as that people are not becoming assertive, or the development agencies are apathetic to the development actions to be taken by the administration in favor of the tribals. This is how the tribe has to be seen as a distinct category of people, not like that of the other communities understood. So therefore, we have certain tribes. So for example, in the south, there are tribes like Kuruchias. They are matriarchal and matrilineal. In northeast, we have seen Khasis and Garos. They are matriarchal and matrilocal. So depending on the social system and traditional practices, they differ. They have their own perception. For example, indigenous knowledge system is very typical for the tribal communities. Say, to understand a tribal, one has to see the microecology. And has to be seen, the facts have to be seen in the context. And the content of the context are meaningful. If you change the content, the context changes. If you change the context, the content changes. So therefore, we must see that within the given context, what are the contents available and how the people behave to their own communities and to the development initiatives taken by the government. If we think that government initiatives are positive for the tribals, the tribal people at the grassroots must say that yes, we are benefited because of government intervention. Within the tribals, we have seen that there are certain people who are very articulative, but majority are voiceless. The voiceless people need to be perceived, need to be understood in the context. In a sense, if somebody says that he doesn't say anything should be taken for granted, it is unacceptable. It is not true. Even silence could be treated as a form of protest. So therefore, we have to see that how the tribal people, within the tribals, how there are different perceptions according to the gender. The women's world is different from men's world. So one has to see that how the women perceive their own environment, their own social organism, their own technology, and how the people are interacting among themselves. What the group interaction, how the rituals have got intimate connections with the economy. Economic transaction has got intimate connection with the perception, with the behavioral components. The normative structure should be considered, but then these should be considered on the basis of hierarchical of needs of the communities. The people must be given chance to identify their own problem and need not be taken by the persuasion made by the planetary bureaucrats. Say for example, some of the officers who are dealing with tribal development in the field, they give alternatives, and before people think anything positive for their own growth, they are taken away by the alternatives given by the developers, the developing agents, the officers in the field. So therefore, officers must see, the officers are the development agents who are responsible for transferring the tribals to be equated to that of rest of the citizens of the nation and enjoy the life like any other citizen, bona fide citizen of the nation. They must learn how to interact with the people. We need to learn a lot from the people at the grassroots. And the perception that we have that they are the less intelligent, less knowledgeable is wrong. If I tell that a small patch of land 10 feet by 10 feet and try to identify all elements, the plants, the animals, the soil structure, the porous within the type of land to be used for a particular purpose, everything the tribal can tell very quickly and efficiently. Whereas a scientist, a botanist, or an environmentalist, if he goes there, he has to look for the dictionary or some documents, and from that document he can relate and say that this is what it is to be used. This doesn't mean that neither they are highly intelligent nor we are highly intelligent. We need to share their culture, their perception, their idea, their knowledge, because knowledge that the people have has got wonderful association with their lifestyle. The entire livelihood of the people are normally woven around the technology that they have, which they have invented for centuries. They have used those technologies for centuries. The modern technologies are expected to enhance the quality of life of the people. If there is no change in quality of life towards betterment, it is definitely not development. So therefore, to think of tribal development, we need to see how the tribes perceive themselves, how the tribal people are becoming assertive, becoming knowledgeable on the existing law, existing provisions for their own development. The tribes as of today are no more isolated. They have also started using the cell phone. They have been taken by the development agencies for better exposure. Periodically, they are given awareness on their own rights and privileges. Even with regard to food security, with regard to their own decision-making process through Gram Sabha, the NGOs are facilitating them, apart from government facilitation. Government wants that they need to develop and enjoy the privileges given to them. Many people still understand, still believe that why preference should be given to them. It is true that if the people, those who are fighting that preference should not be given to the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe people, they must go to the extreme inaccessible area and realize they can, if they go there and can they realize that how they are leading life and what life is being led by the people who are at the scarce resources. The mining oppression is rampantly changing the ecological system of the people. There is a food insecurity coming up because seasonally they have a dependence on forest for their survival. The roots, the tubers, leafy vegetables, animals, and there are many type of food they procure from forest. Those forests are now declining. The number of reasons are attributed to that: mining, sanctuaries, and there are many, say, construction roads, construction institutions inside. These are the things which are not allowing the tribal people to have accessibility to their own traditional resources. For example, the nomadic communities living in Mayurbhanj, they are not allowed, the Mankadeas for example, they need to procure the raw materials of rope making. And rope making needs to enter into the core area that is being identified as core area by the government, not to allow anyone to enter into. Although Forest Right Act of 2006 permits them to enter into the resource area where they can procure their resources, the fibers, to prepare the rope, they are not allowed. There is the provision that they must have their own habitat rights under the Forest Right Act. The habitat right has not been promoted. The people need to be taken into confidence by PRA method, by encouraging them to identify through their own cultural metrics the traditionally identifiable territory, habitat can be located by the modern system such as GPS system. That is not being done. So we need to do a lot more things to bring the tribals to the modern civilized, to come to the level of modern civilized people. The tribals are still backward. We need to do a lot more things. But then these lot more things to transform them to enjoy the citizen's life for the independent India, we need to be, considerate and try to see the tribal people from within their own culture and social metrics. Thank you.